All right, welcome everyone. We'll be starting soon. I'm Isaac Espinal for Dallas here in Texas, and I serve as the America's Promise Youth Board Member. So we're excited to have everyone here today. We have a great event planned. In the first part of our conversation, we will discuss issues facing Latinx youth, communities and families, and then we're gonna focus on Latinx representation and leadership. At the end, we will have a lively Q&A, so please think of questions. Please think of questions and send them to us. Before we begin, I want to talk about a few logistics for today's event. Please ask any general or technical questions in the chat feature or Zoom right here below. And then please submit any questions for the panelists into the Q&A function. Lastly, there are instructions for how to access real-time Spanish translation for those that are needed. To get things started, we want to hear from you in the chat. What's one word that describes how you're feeling today? I'm gonna go ahead and start. I feel proud. So please start putting in the chat how you guys are feeling. We want to hear how you guys are feeling this morning. So while you respond to that, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Moises Linares, who is the sports anchor for Telemundo and NBC. Moises?
All right, Isaac, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. This is the first time I get to work with this organization. I want to thank both Nico and Kelsey for hunting me down. They wouldn't leave me alone. They kept insisting, and I've had like 20 messages. So I said, you know what? I have to be a part of this event. I saw the panelists, and I said, wow, amazing people. So let me introduce you to the panelists, because this is not about me. This is not about the panelists. This is about you, but you need to know about the people who are representing you and the people who are speaking in this great virtual event this afternoon. Let's start with Sindy Benavides, the president and CEO of LULAC. So give her like a virtual clap. I know usually we would be doing this in person and clapping out loud. So Sindy, welcome. We have Nadia Hernandez from Young Professional Leader, Communities in School. So we're gonna give you a virtual clap as well. Altagracia Montilla, Chief Equity Officer, Center for Supportive Schools, all the way from the Bronx. And we are also joined by Elmer Roldan, Executive Director, Communities in Schools of Los Angeles. That's my home city. So Elmer, you get a special shout out. And Dennis Vega, Interim President and CEO of America's Promise Alliance. So welcome. These are our panelists. I'm making sure that I did not miss anybody. So panelists, turn your cameras on. I thought you guys were gonna turn your cameras on as I was mentioning you, so we could get that virtual clap going. So welcome. Let me remind you that this conversation will be split into 3. We have some questions for the panelists. We also have your questions at the end. So we're gonna start because there's a lot of things to talk about this afternoon. And this is a question for the panelists. What are the issues that Latinx, Latinos, Latinas, young people and communities are facing right now? Anybody can start shimmying. Don't be afraid, guys. We have you. I saw Bronx. Where are you at? Why are you hiding? So let's get this conversation going. Anybody can jump in, and we'll be having some follow-up questions. So don't be afraid. Don't be shy. This is your moment to shine.
I'll go ahead and kick it off, Moises. Not being shy, although I am an introvert. And first and foremost, to Rey and to Dennis, thank you so much for the invitation and for inviting me to be in this dialogue and talk about these issues that are so important to all of us. You know, as we think of your question, Moises, in terms of what are some of the critical issues that we see our community facing, I'm going to stay away from education because I know that so many of the folks that are on this panel are educators by background and are in schools. But I will tell you that as a National Latino Civil Rights Organization, what we're seeing is a disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our Latino families. And although we're only 18% of the population, we're over 38% of the COVID cases. And when you actually dive into states or even counties, You know, in my own home county of Fairfax, Virginia, we're only 16.2% of the population, but back in April, we were over 60% of all COVID cases. And so I say that because what we're seeing from a national lens is so many families, one, who are experiencing food insecurity. We're also seeing families experiencing financial insecurity, as many of the individuals work in service sectors or industries that were literally shut down. They were furloughed without paid or put on administrative leave without pay. And that's so important to recognize because, you know, this has a trickle effect. And, you know, the story that I was mentioning earlier in the week is that as we were doing our hunger relief program, we were chatting with one of the mothers, family members, and she was telling us that right now she was deciding whether she could buy flour, cooking oil, and beans versus buying laundry detergent. And unfortunately, this is the reality that so many of our families are facing. And then I think of our children and the compounded trauma that they may be facing, one, because of technology literacy and or access to technology and broadband, but also one, if you're an immigrant under this current administration, that you may be attacked and or that, you know, right now a threat is our own federal government against immigrants. And then thirdly, that you're seeing your parents suffer and you're seeing your parents, one, go through food insecurity and financial insecurity. And so, you know, we look at all these issues, Moises, and we know absolutely that we have to make sure that we are as mindful and as involved as we possibly can in helping out communities.
I'm glad you touched on that topic, Sindy, and we're going to keep it right there before we move on to education, because I want to ask the panelists, as COVID-19 disparately affects Black and Latino families with death tolls, race relations, and police brutality in cities around the US, in what way can you, as a Latino leader, work to address social unrest in communities?
Heard you say Bronx earlier. See, I didn't get to my unmute button, but I see you try to call me out, but I feel that. I love it.
I'm calling you up. I'm not calling you out.
I see that in a loving way.
Go ahead, Altagracia.
I feel the love. You know, it's interesting because as I hear, you know, the pieces of information that Sindy offered, and as we continue to talk about the challenges in the Latinx community, I can't help but recognize and almost kind of relive some of the trauma that I dealt with as a child, and I know that many communities deal with. And I say that to say that a lot of the issues that we are seeing today for Black and Brown communities is not unique to COVID. They've been amplified by COVID and by this civil rights movement, which happens to be the largest civil rights movement in global history. So when I think of myself as a leader in this position, I think about a couple of things. One, the importance of being able to contextualize what is happening historically, like put it in context, again, to recognize that this is not new and to understand the root causes of it, right? And the root causes being, and we shall name it, right? Racism that exists within our country, white supremacy, which is rooted inside the foundation of the systems of our country, and to kind of inform ourselves, myself, to stand beside and take leadership of those who are most marginalized and make sure others do the same, and to continue to put a mirror up to myself and to make sure that I'm completely committed to anti-racism, to creating a more just world, before even supporting communities and doing the same thing. And as we continue to support communities as well.
We're going to move to another question, which is, within the current economic situation, millions of Latinos now find themselves without jobs or financial resources. Roughly 1 in 3 Latino families, that's 35%, have experienced a job loss in the household, according to Latino Decisions Somos survey. How can youth-serving organizations and systems better serve Latinx young people and families during these times?
So Moises, I'm going to jump in. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. So I'm Elizabeth Santiago, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at Mentor National. And our headquarters are in Boston, Massachusetts, where I currently live. And I just wanted to share, because I wanted to maybe jump on the point that Altagracia mentioned about interrogating context. Because one of the main things we focus on at Mentor is relationships and meaningful connections between youth and adults. So I'm not going to sit here and say that those things have a direct effect on, economic stability, but it's also not a nice to have. So it's clear in the time of COVID that youth have the potential of feeling disconnected. So how do we ensure that relationships are discussed as a necessity? And I want to be clear that not all relationships are created equal. So when it comes to Latinx youth, we have to ensure that adults and mentors understand that they are partners in the relationship, that they are there to listen, to affirm, and to learn, and to interrogate the root causes, again, co-signing Altagracia. So, they're not there to impose their own beliefs. So my social work friends call it an unconditional positive regard, and it has to be evident to young people, and that will support, and as they navigate challenges, having those important relationships, meaningful relationships, is something that is of great importance to us, and ensuring that youth are truly seen and heard. So that's just something I wanted to mention before we get into sort of the more hard-hitting questions, but I really wanted to be sure to share our perspective from Mentor.
Elizabeth, Moises, I hope you don't mind if I come in right now, but Elizabeth, you mentioned mentorship. You said relationships might not be, but I actually think they're essential. As a youth and a youth leader, especially I'm actually one of these 1 in 3. Both of my parents, like my dad is a truck driver, and then my mom cleaned houses. I was out of the window cleaning houses actually because of this fear of COVID, right? I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience. So I'm a senior at Texas Christian University here in Texas, and actually had 3 jobs, aside from being a full-time student pre-COVID. I actually go to 4 now, because what you're going to see, and I think this is in the youth community, when parents aren't able to work, that falls on the youth, right? They have to continue. Income is income, right? You have to figure out some way. So what you're seeing now, and I've seen it in my work, it's like, oh, all these new beginner first-time workers. I'm like, so where do you start working? Whether that be Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, hotel valet, and it's, well, my mom got laid off or fired, and we still have to continue to bring in this income, right? So how do you do that without derailing or completely shutting down, right? And only focusing on that. I think mentorship and relationships are essential, right? When you have that adult that's like, hey, I understand this is a rough time for you, right? I know you're not working for yourself, but for your family. Also keep your studies at the same time. I'm here for you. I can help you with English. I was okay at English, right? So continuing those relationships with nonprofits or even community leaders, I think is super important. So thank you so much for mentioning that. That really did resonate.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in on this question as well, because I feel like community organizations are playing a dual role in this time period. One, community organizations have had to step up and do more in the direct service space because their families have needed it. The safety net has suddenly disappeared as COVID has began to ravage our communities. So that's one role, is us having to step up and be okay doing more than what we're typically used to doing. But the other side, and this is particularly important for nonprofit organizations that tend to shy away from getting involved in organizing work or activism, is that we can't remain silent. We can't remain complicit with the system of exploitation that our families are impacted by, especially given that young people of color have been at the forefront of social justice movements. When we look at our history, any advancement that has happened in this country has been a result of young people stepping up for civil rights, voting rights, LGBTQ rights, and against exploitation and police brutality. When you look at, particularly for Black and Brown communities, the Black Panthers, the Chicano movement, organizations like SNCC that fought for voting rights, and the Young Lords. I mean, across the country, really across the world, it has been young people who have challenged institutions and have forced those institutions to look at itself in the mirror and step up for young folks. And I feel like we're living that in this time period as well. In Los Angeles, we have a very strong education reform movement that has fought for college prep classes, decriminalization of young people of color in schools, defunding the police, but more importantly, questioning the institution of public education away from this status quo mentality that young people and their parents are to blame for their outcomes, and really questioning the role of educators and the system for the way that resources need to be distributed equitably in a way that doesn't take this cookie cutter approach to educating children, but rather addresses the specific needs of of special populations, right? Whether it's special education, English language learners, Black kids, and then and poverty as a whole is something that's continuing to impact our community. So I think that young people continue to lead, young people continue to be the ones that are vocal about these issues. And I think for Latinos, two big topics have come up in recent years. I think immigration has continued to be at the forefront, and the right for to be treated like humans and to be able to receive services and protections like DACA, and to keep people out of the concentration camps where our folks are being kept at today. But also the reflection that in this time period, we are questioning our own interaction with race and questioning the way that anti-Blackness and our own complex history with racism and colorism exists in the Latino community, and the way that we have to address the way that we are brought up, but also our complex history of colonization and the way that it continues to play out today. And you see us stepping up, and you see younger generations challenging even our generations and our parents about the way that we interact with one another and the way that we treat particularly Indigenous and Black people in our communities.
I'm gonna jump right back in. Thank you, Elmer, for your comments on that. But I want to apologize because I forgot to introduce two of our panelists. I think I missed them on my PowerPoint here. Rey Saldana, President and CEO in Communities and Schools, and Elizabeth Santiago, Chief Program Officer, Mentor National in Boston. She already spoke a little bit, so welcome. And once again, my apologies. Let's get Rey in this conversation. As Latinx youth return to schools virtually and in person, what are some of the issues and challenges they are facing, and what possible solutions should be prioritized?
Thank you, Moises. And I'm coming in from San Antonio, and I'm the President and CEO of Communities in Schools. And you've gotten to just kind of hear a little bit about some of the best and brightest. So Elmer Roldan leads Communities in Schools of Los Angeles. And I just want to keep pulling a little bit at that thread that Elmer described, which is that there is this reckoning that's happening all over the country. And the question is not just reckoning for organizations and systems, it's even individuals. And what Elmer described is even within the Latino community, reckoning with our place in history, our place where we maybe have not spoken up enough, have been silent when other marginalized groups have been stepped over or stepped on, I think is incredibly important, because at the end of the day, you described like, what are the biggest issues facing Latinos? Like, Latino issues are American issues. And if it's around digital inclusion, access to social emotional supports, this is what we would support for any student, Black or brown. We at CIS, we just happen to be an organization who supports 80% Black and brown families and students. And I think I just want to sort of make an indictment on one institution when we describe like what systems we really want to come back to a new normal. Elmer talked about this already, which was like, how do you rebuild a school that was never built for us to begin with? And us is a really broad term, but I think I put into this us category where you look at the curriculum of, at least here in Texas, I can speak to specific examples where we've written people out, written them to the margins of historical prominence, or something more specific that I hope people hold on to. Certainly we're gonna beat the drum at Communities in Schools, is that when we think about how you build a school, the architecture, like we're now 51% of the students sitting in classrooms today are students who qualify and are living in poverty. We were never building schools for that kind of a demographic. So that means you have schools without site coordinators who do the work that CIS does, which is meeting all those non-academic needs that are happening in schools, whether it's outside the school, whether it's like you described, the 1 in 3 families who have lost jobs. And I'll just say this, here in San Antonio, I still live on the south side where I was born and raised. And when the economy shut down and it was just essential workers, my entire neighborhood went to work. I mean, these are folks who are working in groceries or working in construction, but at the same time, many of them were vulnerable because they depended on on the service industry or things that had to be shut down quickly. So again, Latino issues are American issues. And I hope we describe it in that way, but we also need to say that there are systems that were never really built for us, starting with our public schools and ensuring that we're meeting the needs, non-academic needs of our children right now.
I want to jump in, and Ray, I appreciate you so much for naming that, and that you brought us there to that reality. And I even offer the context of kind of taking that statement further of the schools not necessarily including us, but they were built really to exclude us, not even just to avoid include, it's just literally to exclude us, and we're designed for folks who do not look like us. And so when I think about the needs of students right now, you know, even just thinking about my peers, right, adults who are established in their careers and have a comfort that maybe some of the students that we serve do not have, we're stressed out, we're anxious, right? We're nervous. Imagine a child, right? A child in a school building walking into, or for some people walking in, or even on screen, still trying to navigate the education system, trying to navigate a curriculum that was not designed to kind of affirm the students that we're speaking of. Trying to navigate the education system without the resources, technological resources, just to start, to even get through the lessons, right? And so when I think about one of the major needs, and I think something that's a very severe and critical need, is being able to support students in kind of what I refer to as emotionally metabolizing what is happening in this moment. Like there are students, there are youth, there are families who are in serious need of some of that mentorship that I think, Isaac, you spoke of earlier, that need that support and connection and relationships to be able to really understand what is happening in the world around us, to understand that it's none of our fault necessarily, right? Because youth sometimes have a tendency to internalize what is happening in the world, and to kind of empower youth and to let them know that they do have some agency in what is happening. They can take control of kind of their own destiny in this moment. So that those social emotional supports are so key. And I do hope that as folks are transitioning back into the school setting, that they let go, educators in particular, let go of some of those academic-based kind of numbers-focused, data-focused approach to thinking about success, and instead maybe think about students' social emotional needs and meeting those needs as a form of success. Like we will succeed in our school setting when our students feel safe, as safe as they possibly can given the climate right now.
I would just jump in here, Moises, before we move on and, point out the silver lining in this, which, for us being a 91-year legacy organization, and Rey, Texas for us is our problem child. We have multiple lawsuits in Texas. Currently, we have over 150 lawsuits nationwide, and the majority of them are in Texas around the issue of voter suppression and education. But I will tell you that I also think that when we think of systems of change, this is where, as individuals, we do have the power to create the change. And the example I can provide for you is that, back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, as our Mexican American children were segregated into separate schools, what we learned was to create a completely different model. And we created the Little School of the 400 to teach our children 400 English words so that they could graduate from these school systems that were not tailored for them and excluded them intentionally. At that time, Congressman Johnson takes this model, which was created by a LULAC member paired with a university professor, and at the national level creates Head Start, which has impacted millions and millions and millions of children. And I bring that example to light because initiatives and organizations like Communities in Schools, Head Start, and others, I think, help to repair a little bit of that infrastructure. But I do think that we do need to be thinking about how we change models, and also how do we make sure that irregardless of the zip code that our children live in or that we live in, that they have access to equal opportunities.
Yeah, can I just jump in real quick? I just wanted to go back to what Isaac said about what he's experiencing now and what that experience is. And Isaac is amazing, but he shouldn't need to be that amazing to be able to accomplish what he needs to accomplish. And I think that's fundamentally one of the biggest problems, is that all of us on this webinar have some version of that story that we've gone through, of having to overcome a system that was built to perpetuate oppression. And I think that's really what we need to focus on, is how to mainstream that understanding, so that when we're talking about schools, as Altagracia said, we're not focused on just the test scores. We're understanding all the things that CIS and other partners do in the whole young person's lives and all the supports that they need. When we're talking about employment, we're not just talking about internships and the need for internships and giving some voice to the fact that young people are interested in internships, but also have to provide income. This isn't about summer jobs for a lot of young people. They are breadwinners for their families. And I think we have to be honest and broaden the people that understand the reality of what young people are going through. And we shouldn't have a system where we have to overcome and put that much pressure on young people to overcome the oppression that we've all been through over hundreds of years.
Dennis, in less than a minute, because we have to move on to the next question. You brought up this great point, and I think a lot of people here can relate to that. So how do we prepare our students, our youth, for whatever's next, which should be the college level, to get them to the professional ranks? What path can we create? Because we're talking about Isaac shouldn't be that amazing, but right now in this day and time, he has to be that amazing to find the opportunities he's finding.
I would like to jump on that. Dennis, thank you for mentioning all that you said, and every single person here on this webinar. Thank you for just allowing me to have a voice here. So a little bit about me. So first of all, I wanted to just say that my name is Nadia Yamilette Hernandez Martinez. I have 2 last names, and I'm very proud of those 2 last names. And I kept my 2 last names and my middle name whenever I became a citizen 7 years ago. I came from Mexico, Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Did not know English when I came to the United States. I was 14, little brain of a teenager. So no English, no one that I knew, nothing. My parents did not know English, nothing. I just came in just like, hey, there you go on. Try to fit in, try to do you, and hopefully you will understand the system of America. Little did I know that I did not know anything about the system, right? Anything about that it started in 1944, Sindy, of desegregating Mexicans. So what? I had no clue that this was happening. So for me, I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew I wanted to be the first woman in my family to go to college. First one. When I think about that, I think about my grandmas that only went to 2nd grade, elementary, 6th grade. I'm the first one, my mom to middle school. And then I get to the professional world. I go to high school, I go through racism. Let's talk about that, racism. I go to college, again, racism. I go to my professional world, racism. I am done with racism. Microaggressions are so real. And even whenever they send you an email, don't send you an email. When you send them an email asking for help and they don't send you back anything, that's microaggression, right? Because I hope that the people in these organizations, the people who are calling on this mission, on these 5 promises, on these 5 basic needs, we need to reevaluate what are these. And one of those is, I think the 4th one is effective education, and 5th, opportunity to help others, right? We need to reevaluate the way that we are actually serving those kids. I say this because I'm also an alumni for CIS. CIS did not make me. I knew I wanted to go to college. Did not make me. It was a resource. It was a resource for me. It was a resource that has allowed me to be in these platforms, to be able to build that social capital that I did not know that I needed to have in order for me to succeed. Honestly, right now, I'm not even surviving with the income, right? I'm not surviving because I still live with my parents. And I say that because not only I have to go through this, it is easier to choose not to go to school because you will have more social capital outside of the professional world. because in the professional world, you already have to have all these connections. And I'm not sorry for being so like outspoken and so angry, but I am angry. So here you go.
Thank you. Amazing, Nadia. Do you keep your head up? I hear great things about you. And I think a lot of people in this conversation can relate to your story, me for once, but we're not even going to get there because I don't want to run out of time. We can go all day talking about stuff like that and these issues that you mentioned that should be recognized and we should bring to light in every conversation we have regarding these topics. But I'm going to ask everybody to participate because we have a poll question and we need your help to answer this question. What issue impacting Latino, Latinas, Latinx youth and families is most top of mind for you entering into the presidential elections? We have options, as you can see on your screens. And I think we're gonna go over the answers or the final numbers at the end of the conversation before we move on to the second part of this conversation, but we need your help, so please answer the question. We're gonna move to the second part of this panel. And time is flying, as you can see, it's already 12:30. Why is increased Latinx, Latinos, Latinas representation in the ranks of leadership important, panelists?
Well, I can jump in and I gotta say that I'm proud to be the first Latino executive director, first person of color executive director of Communities and Schools of Los Angeles, and I'm a first-time executive director as well. So I am not only learning how to lead, but also learning how to lead during a time of crisis, which I'm getting a double lesson, a double major, if you want to call it that. And I think that my experience as an immigrant, I was born in Guatemala. I was brought here in the late 80s. I landed in South Central Los Angeles and never left. My family has roots in South Central. I was fortunate enough to purchase a home in South Central 5 years ago. And my experience is growing up in an organization that centers Black and Latino residents in driving the solutions in the community from a lens that looks at systemic issues like race, economic and social justice, and everything else that is encompassed in what marginalized communities face. Truly prepared me to bring that perspective into an organization like Communities in Schools. And I want to thank Rey and everyone else in the network who has been welcoming of what I bring to the table, because the organization has certainly been a beacon of light in Los Angeles and has driven life-changing programs for our young people and the staff who work in the organization. And we are now in a position that we're ready to make that more widely known and more widely available. And I think it starts with centering people who have lived experiences. I saw people commenting this, Nadia, but you should never apologize for being who you are and for your experience, and even for that passion and that frustration that you express. Just know that we all feel it, but as time passes and as more time goes on and you spend more time in professional settings, that passion and that anger never goes away. We just learn how to code it. We just learn how to utilize more fancier words to express why it feels that frustrating to walk outside and see what it feels like the weight of the shoulders, the weight of the world being on the shoulders of Latinos in this time period. So it starts with centering people who have lived experiences. It starts with recognizing that it's not just about degrees, but it's also about the lived knowledge that we bring to the table, the representation, and it's about bringing values. It's about having people at the table who truly understand and empathize with what our communities are facing and dealing with on a daily basis, because I feel like that's what truly drives solutions. We are not saviors. We are not here to give to our communities. We are not here to bring salvation to our communities. We are here to partner with our communities to identify alongside them what the best solutions are for them to have the agency to be their own advocates and their own leaders, rather than them us believing that the solution will lie in a backpack filled with school supplies that we give them once a year. And so it truly is a partnership, and it starts with having people at the table who understand and honor those experiences.
And I would jump in here, Moises, and Elmer, I couldn't agree anymore. And I'm a fellow from Honduras with a grandfather from El Salvador. But I will tell you,
Central America in the house, gotta represent.
Before you jump in, Sindy, let me extend the question. And Elmer, I'm from Los Angeles too, South Central, Slauson and Crenshaw. Mi familia del Salvador.
I'm in Slauson and Broadway, gotta represent.
Mi familia del Salvador, so I know what you're talking about. Sindy, let me extend that question for you, right? We asked, why is increased Latinx representation in the ranks of leadership important? How do your own life experiences inform your work today as well?
Well, I will tell you on that expanded question, Moises, and to give you context of the work that we had ahead in terms of addressing systemic institutional racism that includes also sexism. You know, here at LULAC, although we're 91 years young and strong, I was the first Latina to serve as the CEO of this organization in 90 years. And even within our own progressive circles, we have a lot of work to do, not only in having Latino representation, but having women, Latinas represented in all those circles. And I know that all the gentlemen on this Zoom call will agree that Latinas are absolutely the influencers, not only in our households, but in our communities. And I will also tell you, and you know, this is kind of like a hashtag that I've adopted, but thank God that we can dream bigger and that our parents and ancestors have inspired us to dream bigger. We can't be what we can't see. And why I say that is because we are so underrepresented at the highest level. And just to give you an example, in California, one of the most progressive states, they passed SB 826, which was to bring gender equity to corporate boards. Of the 511 seats that opened up in a state where Latinos are 38% of the population, only 17 seats went to Latinas. Of the 511 in a state where we're 38% of the total population. And we see this not only in the corporate board, we see this in the federal government, we see this in the nonprofit sector, we see this all across. And oftentimes when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion / exclusion, Latinos are excluded, and not to mention Afro-Latinos, right? I mean, like, I think finally we're beginning to address the issue of anti-Blackness. We're finally acknowledging that within the ethnicity of Hispanic, we have Black. We are addressing the fact that when we think about diversity and inclusion, Latinos are not at the table. And furthermore, Moises, that we have so many organizations that are doing work in our communities, but lack the leadership on their boards at the C-suite level, where Latinos need to be at the table influencing and making those decisions. And again, we can't be what we can see. And on the issue of voting, because I've seen it in the trail, I just want you to remember that every 30 seconds, a Latino in the US is turning 18. Every 30 seconds. And what that means is the opportunity that Latinos have to size the narrative of this country. The fact is that as we continue to grow in number and powers, there will be several tactics that will be used to oppress our community. And unfortunately, Texas is set. We're getting ready to head to the Supreme Court with this battle that we're having with Governor Abbott there and having mail-in boxes. But we know that that journey is long. And I will tell you, Moises, that in my life, there were so many people, including my own counselor, who told me that I could not and would not be able to go to a higher education institution. And how many of us have been told no, or have been at minimum, have our dreams stop for a minute? And I just want you to think of all our children who have been told no, or discouraged, or been told to take another path because of who they were, or the background that they came from, or the community that they lived in. And so I think we as individuals, as folks that are here to be as helpful as we can, to be partners and doing good things with our community, that we are mindful of our own unconscious bias, and we are mindful that we're not here to be saviors. Elmer, you're so right, that we're here to link arms with our community and to harness the potential that they already have, because they have it. They were born with it. It's just that, time and time again, they've been told that they can't do it, or they've been shown through racism that they are less worthy, but we know we are worthy.
Sindy, that's amazing. Participants, I want you to get into this. So if Sindy and Elmer are speaking fire, please give me thumbs up on the chat. I want to see all those thumbs going up, those claps. These guys are killing it. But Elizabeth, where are you at? We need you to stop hiding. Isaac, come out. Rey, come out. Dennis, come out. This question is for you. So I need you guys to answer this question for me. How do we create more pathways and opportunities for Latino youth to grow into and serve as leaders in the youth development sector?
I'm ready. I'm so fired up by everything that's being said. Thank you, Sindy and Elmer. I also had the same experiences growing up, told that you shouldn't strive for this because that's not available to you. And it's very unfortunate, because I think about folks like Nadia and my nieces and nephews who are coming up in the world, who are hearing these same narratives and hearing that we're not worthy in some way, and angry. And my anger got sublimated. So I tried to conform and move into this environment so that I could fit in. And to go back to representation, what that means for me is that there are spaces where I can be my authentic self. How amazing is it for young people to just be themselves without having to figure out, well, what's the right message for this situation? Or will these people actually understand me? Or will there be some kind of racism or a microaggression, or all of those things that cloud your thinking before you actually participate and think? I think we need to just combat that and stop that, because we are missing out on such wonderful young people in the future of our country without having these sort of supports in place. And so again, I have to speak to my role as a chief program officer and mentor. We want to mentor young folks. We don't want to save them. We don't want to come into communities and talk about deficits. We want to talk about all the assets that communities bring to the table, especially our communities who work through so much and yet still thrive. So again, it's very important. Representation is very important. Plus, everything that everyone's talked about. So I'm very fired up and I'm excited to continue this conversation.
Yeah, and I can go ahead and add.
Isaac, here we go.
Yeah, I'll step up, don't worry. So for me, I think, there's two organizations I see. First and foremost, LULAC, right? I've actually wanting to meet Sindy. I was in LULAC in high school. As a fellow Altagracia, to me, she was someone that, and they're an American, right? You could see and see. And so a lot of these organizations like America's Promise Alliance, LULAC, I really respect their youth leadership position. Obviously, I'm a youth board member here at APA. And, one way, especially in the youth leadership sector, right, you're going to find that a lot of the current leaders, like most of you here, your experiences were validated, right? And they were lifted up and were given a platform. So therefore, you went and you filled your positions, right? You wanted to talk about it. So I think one strong way that you can do that is by offering youth leadership positions, not necessarily board positions, but just even in local community organizations, right? Like CIS, in your one community, one school, one wherever you guys target, right? Bring in opinions and validate these experiences like you guys have today to me, right? Because therefore you motivate that individual to be like, you know what, my experience is relatable. My experience can be shared. And that way they might choose a career, for example, youth advocacy, right? A major that leads them to go back to serve their communities, right? Because their experiences are validated. It comes full circle. So I think that's a great way, just youth leadership and keeping those opinions and experiences of youth in decisions and these a lot of agencies and nonprofits.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention is that Elizabeth, Sindy, and Altagracia, it's inspiring to see like a CEO or a chief or like, people in like these roles. I have not seen that. I have not encountered that. And I need people in these roles to mentor me. I honestly don't have that. And like, sometimes I feel like it's too much, right? I'm asking for too much or too much of their time or too much of this. So it's like offer that to to people who are willing to learn. I think that is the key. It's like they want to learn, and so they can give to others. You can't expect a person to give without receiving. And I think that's the place where I am at this point in my life, is like, I'm so done. Like I don't have anything to give because I have not received. It's like I continue and I continue, and so that's why I'm here right now. And so anyways, these three women are inspiring, and I am just so thankful and grateful that I am here, seeing you guys being badasses, seriously. So thank y'all.
I want to thank you, Nadia, and also share that, you know, even in thinking about you calling us in or kind of giving us a shout out, it's beautiful. And I want to give you one as well, because the way to think about showing up or being an inspiring person isn't just about the title, it's also how you present yourself. And even you being in this space, being vulnerable and brave, that within itself is a form of leadership and is something to be inspired by. I know a couple of folks talked about the representation piece. And of course, representation isn't just, like, this whole conversation isn't just about us being at the table, but it's us being our authentic selves, being our true selves, us, which I know sometimes this could be challenging, but not code switching, to saying fuck that to the code switching thing, right? And showing up to this space in whatever professional space as who we are, bringing our parents, the Latino women who inspired us, the Black women, the Black, you know, these persons who have really contributed to who we are today, and bringing that to the table, right? I think there's this kind of, sometimes I notice these conversations get lost in the, like, I went to college and then now I am. I always was, okay? With college, without college, with my mother not going to college, finishing school, my father in prison, with us not having money, with us being in the South Bronx, trying to navigate this, you know, anti-Black, racist, xenophobic, homophobic, you know, space, sexist space. And so when I think of all those things, it's, again, important for us to acknowledge that the education doesn't make us. We were made before we got here. We are the ones we've been looking for, right? And we have to tell that to youth. We are the ones that we've been looking for. And so when we look at youth, I think it's important for us to let them know that, like, you waking up this morning is a win. You know, you showing up to school or showing up on screen or having a conversation with me, like, that in itself is inspiring. And those are the kind of messages that we need to send students. You know, like, showing up as our authentic selves, making sure that we truly bring our culture to the table, and not like for a one-day event or a one-month event, but really incorporating that in the actual strategies that we build within communities, right? So for instance, we know that Black and brown communities are huge on connectedness, on, you know, chosen family, on, you know, understanding ancestral knowledge, historical knowledge. Like, we need to build that actually into the systems of how we are creating solutions for our communities, and not to use these old school, antiquated, outdated, you know, systems that were created for folks who do not look like us.
Let me jump in.
I would just go ahead. Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Dennis. And I'll be brief. I want to raise up what Altagracia said, what Nadia has said, and even as the leader of communities and schools, like, what Nadia said is true. Like, we did not make Nadia. Nadia has always been who she is, and that's the theory of change. And it's hard for organizations to admit that, because there is this sort of savior complex that we have the key, that this is the medicine that will cure the ills of community. But when we really start thinking about the work from a political level, from a nonprofit level, from an organizational systems level, is the only way to change communities is from the inside out. And that's why representation matters. I'll say that again, like, if we want to change a community, it's because, you know, one, we're handing off the mic, but two, like, you are, like, this is something I learned from a LULAC organizer, which was that if you are not at the table, you're on the menu. And when I was running for city council in San Antonio, wondering, why is this city so unequal, where it's the nice side of town, the haves and the have-nots, and it's not on accident that these communities are being created this way. It's on purpose. And so when you think about what it looks like to have representation, Nadia, Altagracia, Elmer, Sindy, like, we can't vacation out of who we are. Like, people are vacationing in this reckoning over the summer. They're vacationing and raising their fists in the air and saying this matters to them. But for folks who are then in positions of leadership, like, they're always who they are. And that's why it's so important when decisions are being made. And I'll just use the example of when I was getting to help lead a city. Like, when you have $1 million to spend and you're trying to figure out where that goes, oftentimes the system tells you where that money goes. It goes to where, you find votes, and the people that always get left behind when they start to distribute money for parks, money for investment in schools, because we're never going to hear from them, because those people have been quieted and they believe they have no power, and they've internalized that. So when you all of a sudden get these people in positions, Nadia's in positions, Elmer in positions, Altagracia, Sindy, Elizabeth, like they don't forget that, and the fire burns in them to want to do something. And so Nadia, appreciate you saying that, because it's not an organization, it's not the outside in that's going to change the communities we care about. And I thought that was important to raise up.
I'm gonna ask
just real quick,
because I know that we're running out of time, and we have questions from participants. You can probably help on with this question, Dennis. I grew up in South Central LA. We have a diverse community, African American, Latinos. I think Elmer will say yes, that's very accurate. How are Black and brown people working together in the ongoing movement for racial justice, and what role can nonprofit leaders play?
I just wanted to say one thing from the last section, we can switch to this one, is just that we also can't put everything on, like I was saying, put everything on Isaac and young people, on communities, or on us as leaders to change the system, right? We have to push other organizations within the youth development field, do work internally to make sure our organizations are doing what we need to do for young people of color, but also push the majority of organizations, because as Sindy said, people like us aren't leading most of the organizations in the field. So we have to put pressure on those organizations to move forward as well.
Keeping them accountable and responsible for their mission and vision. Thank you, Dennis.
I would say, Moises, it's also acknowledging, right? And I will tell you that in the middle of Black Lives Matter, I had to do some of my own internal work with my own board to make sure that we understood the importance of Black Lives Matters, that we understood our own anti-Blackness and colorism and racism. And I will say that as someone who personally experienced it, because my children are both Latino and African-American, my husband's African-American, I will tell you that even within my own family, I acknowledge the racism that my husband and that I unfortunately indirectly took simply because of who he is in terms of his ethnic and race. And then I would say we have to also make sure that we are firm in terms of our convictions and our values. And it's not easy work. You know, nobody wants to acknowledge their unconscious bias. Nobody wants to acknowledge all this work that all of us hold, right? Like this is not unique to one group. It's not unique to everyone. And then I would say, to the point of Dennis, it's going to take all of us, and we need allies, we need partners. This is going to be every ethnic group. It's going to be all individuals in different positions of power. And what I've discovered, Moises, is that oftentimes I still am the only Latina in the room and at the table. And we ourselves have to be able to point out that we are right now 60 million strong. In just 30 years, we're going to more than double. And when you look at our K-12 education system, 1 in 4 children are Latino. And then you go into states like California and Texas, where we are already at the 2050 mark, right? Like we already represent over 30%, if not more, of the student population. And so I think, you know, in that sense, Moises, one, we have to acknowledge our own truths and our own biases and work on making sure we're better. And then also bring in allies and partners and make sure that we also have that commitment in linking arms.
Altagracia, I want to hear from you on this question, because as an Afro-Latina, right, you haven't told me, but I'm guessing based on your Dominican background, how are Black and brown people working together, and the importance of this issue? Because now more than ever, we need to be united, we need to be together, because we face a lot of similar challenges, not every single one of them, but a lot of similar obstacles. And it seems like often these two communities they're trying to divide the two communities to put them in separate categories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, for a very long time. This is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen brown and Black communities coming together in solidarity. I think when thinking about the Latinx community and the Black community, merging forces, I really just can't help but want to, lift this notion of supporting the most marginalized, which can be very, very kind of challenging for us, because oftentimes we as people naturally are kind of stuck in our own, our own experiences of those who we see. But for all of us, even sitting here on this call, where there's also so many privileges that we have now, even just given the fact that we're here, like on a weekday after, I don't know anybody on my family who's just on a Zoom call talking to, having the privilege to even have these conversations, because even having the language to navigate it is a privilege within itself. So I just want to offer like the concept of like uplifting the most marginalized folks. I think there is this movement now of really looking a little deeper into the like data that's associated with some of the challenges that we are seeing in our community. And again, making that connection between what we have seen historically. I'm seeing so much more of folks who are saying the R word, racism, right? Which is something that I did not see in my work before in the same way. I've been talking about white supremacy culture for 10 years now, and kind of creating workshops and strategies for incorporating that into our organizations. And for the first time, I'm seeing that now become kind of a household term for those who are really trying to make a difference and transform communities. So again, I think the piece that I want to uplift is supporting the most marginalized and understanding what the most marginalized groups are within our community. Because when we uplift from the ground up and we take the leadership of others and are able to know when to take a seat versus when to lead, then I think the great transformation and impact can happen.
I'd like to jump in.
Elmer, I'm gonna cut you.
Okay, cool.
Or I'm gonna give you because I like listening to you. You spread a lot of wisdom. I'm gonna give you 1 minute because we have to move on. We are running out of time and I have questions from the participants that I want to get to. So 1 minute, Elmer, go.
Fair enough. I think it involves organizing, advocacy, and being accomplices. I think that Latinos, we often follow and mirror the movements of Black America, and we have to honor that and work in solidarity, unity, and we have to integrate our strategies the way that generations have done. Black and brown unity has been a thing. It's not new. It's something that has existed and should continue to exist. I don't know one issue impacting Latinos that does not impact Black people. I think Afro-Latinos are often ignored when we talk about Latino, Latinx labels. And I think we have to create spaces and carry that unity no matter where we go. It doesn't have to be that there's Black people in the room and that's when we talk about Black-brown unity. We have to represent for that unity no matter where we are and continue to fight for each other's liberation.
All right, now Isaac, Nadia, we have less than 3 minutes. I need you to answer this question from the participants. Isaac and Nadia, youth are often at the forefront of changes. What can organizations like the ones represented on this event do to help prepare you and other young people to lead?
So I can start, Nadia. And for me, the easiest one, being part of some of these movements and seeing you get inspired all the time, and they have so much energy and passion, right? But they lack direction and experience, right? I think some things we've always known is, we need to listen to older, not necessarily obey, but take, with age does come certain wisdom, right? And to become organized and to hit the points and to get, into these, interviews and how do you conduct yourself, right? I think we do have to pay attention. So an organization can provide education and organization, right? How do you organize something? How do you give out pamphlets? How do you talk to community members? Where do you go? Which community centers do you go to, right? Who are the people, the mayor, who do you talk to? So I think in that respect, education about organization is something that nonprofits organizations can do.
Thank you, Isaac. Nadia, jump in. We have less than a minute.
Yeah, so civic engagement is very important, but also, like I said, you have to fill up the cup of a person before they can give to others. So first, actually listen to the person, the young adult, and what their goals are. And if they don't have the goals like articulated, because obviously I'm still learning, help them, guide them, walk with them. And so walking with them and actually like asking them, hey, what do you want to do? Or, hey, like I have this friend who like connect them, right? So they can also be a resource for others as well. So representation is extremely important. And I'm so happy to be here with people who are brown. And shout out to my also my African American friends who have really believed in me, because I have to give a shout out to Stephen, since Stephen is the one who has took me to Alabama to go and see really the root of this country. So
Nadia, I'm gonna cut you off. Thank you everybody for participating. We're gonna end this with Dennis. Dennis, come back in before we are shut out. So come say goodbye.
Sure, I'll make it quick. I just want to thank everyone for participating. Obviously this is a personal, issue for me, and I just really enjoyed the conversation. America's Promise, we're committed to having more conversations like this. So, and moving this forward as an alliance. So be on the lookout for more conversations and actions to help move us forward. So thanks everyone for participating. Gracias por todos que participaron. Todos estamos aquí juntos en la lucha. Gracias.